Shalom, everybody. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today when I'm doing this recording, but I've been wanting to get to it for some time now. And I thought about inviting some other brothers to do this one with me, like I did the last one or part one. But I really wanted to tackle this one myself because in my latest debate with Carlos Xavier, did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? When it came to the cross examination period where Carlos had the opportunity to ask me questions, I feel like there were some questions I wasn't given an opportunity to even answer, and then some that I was not allowed to answer adequately. So, the person that is doing the questioning has every right to want to move along to the next question or point once he feels or she feels that the answer has been given. That's perfectly fine. I don't mind that. Usually, what I try to stick to in my mind is I give myself, 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds to ask a question. And then I give the answerer up to 60 seconds to answer the question. Now, they may answer the question in 10 seconds. It could be a yes or no question or a very succinct answer. They can answer how they want to, but I will give them up to 60 seconds. I'm not going to let them keep going on for 2 or 3 minutes where they, monologue, because that's not the point of the cross ex. But you want to give the person that you're asking the question to a proper time frame to answer the question. And I just don't think that I was given that at all. So I want to do a review, and I want to help you, the listeners, my brothers and sisters who practice the Torah. I want to help you um, be able to answer questions, whether easy or difficult, better. I want you to be a better answerer when people ask you questions of the hope that is within you in regards to your obedience and why you live the way that you live. So we are going to get right into this.
Okay, Matthew, let me start here. Do you still slaughter a lamb every year for Passover?
Yes.
Why?
Because the law of Yahweh through the agency of Moses teaches me to do that, specifically in Exodus 12. That would be the initial text right there. So it's a peace or a fellowship offering. It's not a sin sacrifice, but it's a meal among worshipers.
So the Passover was not also for sins?
No. The Passover was a shelamim in Hebrew, known as a peace offering or a fellowship between worshipers of Yahweh. That's what the Passover is. So, okay, so right here from the get-go, you see that his question was designed to mock something that I practice in my own life, and I thought it was completely out of order. Now, I answered because, you don't want to stop the debate and have an argument, but it was completely out of order. It had absolutely nothing to do with the debate title, Did Jesus Practice and Preach the Law of Moses? He actually, if you go back to the time I cross-examined him, my first question was in regard to Yeshua's birth and childhood. And he combated me briefly by saying, what does that have to do with the debate? Now, I think that has everything to do with the debate, because what Yeshua practiced didn't just start during his ministry, but it started during his birth and his childhood, right, since he was a little boy. But this particular question right here, this was designed by him to be a shock factor for the audience, because there are many, even in the Torah observant community, that would frown upon me slaughtering a lamb for the Passover. I'll talk about that a little bit more here momentarily. But the question was completely uncalled for, very unprofessional. And it was meant to be a debate tactic instead of honestly and seriously beginning his questions to me based on the topic of the debate. Now, he was taken a little bit back by me saying that the Pesach, the Passover, was not a sin offering. Anyone who studies the Torah for a living, which is something that I do, I spend the majority of my Bible study time is spent studying the Torah. It's so humorous how that people who don't ever study the Torah think that they can tell us what it says or how we should practice it. But those of us that spend our life studying the Torah somehow don't know what it says or what it means. Um, there are 5 types of offerings in the Torah. The 5 types are the burnt offering, that is the korban olah. The burnt offering is completely consumed upon the altar. The worshiper gains nothing by it. I tell people that you could illustrate it maybe in a crude way by, you pull $100 bill out of your pocket and you light it on fire. You gain nothing by it, right? It's completely consumed and given up as an offering. Olah means to rise up, to ascend. And then you have, after the burnt offering, you have the peace offering or the fellowship offering. And this is what is known in Hebrew as the shelamim. And you can hear the word shalom, peace, comfort, health, wealth in that, word shelamim. But it's not necessarily referring to peace between the offerer and the creator, although that peace is there, when the offering is done in goodwill and of faith. The peace there between man and the Almighty is there, but it's referring more of peace and fellowship between worshipers of the Almighty. And after the shelamim, you have the mincha, which is the grain offering, which is bloodless. It's not an animal. And then you have the asham, the guilt offering, and then you have the chata'at, which is the sin offering. Those are the 5 categories or types of sacrifices mentioned in the early chapters of the book of Leviticus. I'm not aware of any other categories in Holy Scripture. So all of the offerings that are given in the Torah fall up under one of those categories. And so the category which the Pesach would fall up under when you study Exodus or Shemot chapter 12 would be the shelamim. It is an offering that is eaten by the one who brings it and also those who are in fellowship with Yahweh. It is an offering that can only be eaten one night, and then the rest has to be burned in the morning, which lines up with Leviticus 19 on fellowship offerings, that they can only be eaten for a certain particular period of time. The ones in Leviticus 19 can be eaten for 2 days, and then if aught remains to the 3rd day, it must be burned with fire. But there's a lot of similarities. So either the Pesach is in a unique category all of its own, like a 6th category, or it falls up under the peace or fellowship, the shelamim. The point that I was making is it is not a sin offering. Yahweh did not tell the Israelites to offer the Passover lamb to remove their sin. They offered the Passover lamb in obedience to what Yahweh had said, placing the blood on their doorpost to receive protection when the destroyer or the destroying angel passed over the houses in the land of Egypt at that time point in history. We know the story. It's very popular. It was helped to be popularized by the Prince of Egypt movie, animated movie that is so known and loved by people all over the world. So it wasn't a sin offering. So number one, when I offer up the Passover or when I slaughter the Passover lamb, it has nothing to do with sin, nor do I believe that I'm doing it in relation to any type of sin removal. It is a meal that we now participate in memorial of the very Passover that took place in the land of Egypt in Exodus chapter 12. And he says there in chapter 12, this day shall be a memorial to you, and you are to keep this feast. And then we see, if we continue to read in the Torah in the wilderness in Numbers 9, it's the 2nd year. They have been in the wilderness and they keep the Pesach again in Numbers 9. The implication here is that all 40 years while they were in the wilderness, each time the Pesach rolled around, they would observe it yet again in the first moon or month of Aviv. Numbers 9 shows an exception how that if a person is unclean by reason of a dead body or they're in a journey, talking about future Passovers, then they are allowed to keep it in the second month, but they shall not just bypass the first month. The second month is an exception to the general rule.
So it was not a to remind them that God Yahweh forgave their sins.
No, the Passover was not a sin sacrifice.
In 1 Corinthians 5, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
specifically verse 7. So as you know, most of Christians do not do that. And I
Sure.
know I saw one of your videos from some time back about why you do it. And you did admit that even within your own community, it is a controversial thing, right? What you're doing.
Oh, by my own community, I mean the broader Torah community, not my own fellowship where I pastor, where I'm an elder. We all do it together, as a matter of fact. So we've got, over 100 of us keeping the Passover in one building overnight, following the ordinances of Exodus chapter 12. So, oh yes, I mean, I
Right.
get rebuked just like you get rebuked for being a Unitarian. I get rebuked for slaughtering an animal religiously. Yeah.
Right. So how do you understand, Paul? Then one of the big texts,
Yeah.
right, is 1 Corinthians 5:7.
Yeah.
Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed.
Yes.
And as you know,
Amen.
he is called by Paul in Romans 6:10, Peter in 1 Peter 3:18, and Hebrews
Yes.
chapter 9. He's the once for all time sacrifice for our sins,
Yes.
so that
Sure.
most of us understand all that to mean that he has taken our place. I believe in substitutionary atonement. He is our lamb, our Passover. I don't need to kill any animal for any reason. Yeah, why do you? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, Jesus is my teacher, and he kept Passover according to the custom, Luke 2, verse 42. Remember when he was 12 years old. So I try to follow my teacher, my rabbi, and do what he did to the best of my ability. I'm not perfect,
Well,
but
he said there, do this in remembrance of what?
he's talking about the bread and the wine. You're going to the Last Supper. So real quick, I had this in my mind here when he first asked this about 1 Corinthians 5:7, which is a beautiful text, and we've got to get it out of our head. Let me share with you what I didn't decide to go this route during the debate. I went another route, but we've got to get it out of our head that just because there is type antitype, or just because there's a reality that shows forth a shadow, so to speak, that both can't be true and both can't work in their own way. The example that I give to people when they say things like this is I'll say, well, is God your father, your heavenly father? And they'll say, well, sure, God's my heavenly father. And I'll say, well, does that mean that you don't have to honor your earthly father? See, ultimately, Yahweh is our father, but that doesn't mean the fifth commandment here upon the earth towards our human father loses its punch. So Yeshua can be our Passover lamb, metaphorically, not that he's a literal lamb, but he's a type of the Passover lamb in Egypt. But there's something about Yeshua's death that resembles the slaughtering of the Passover lamb. I would argue that Yeshua died at the same time that the Passover was being observed. I don't think that's a coincidence. But Yeshua can be the Passover lamb metaphorically, and we still eat the Passover lamb. Now, this was definitely continued to be done by the earliest followers of Yeshua after he ascended into heaven, even by those that think that you have to have a standing temple in the city where Yahweh puts his name, which at that time was Jerusalem. For people that think that you have to have that in order to keep Passover properly, well, that still continued on for approximately 40 years. So after Yeshua ascended into heaven, let's just say, for sake of argument, AD 33, roughly, okay, 30, 33, something like that. Well, he ascended into heaven, and we know for certain that the apostles were gathered together in Jerusalem on Shavuot in Acts chapter 2, what is called in Greek Pentecost, the second of the three major annual feasts. It only stands to reason that when AD 34 rolled around the next spring, that they were in Jerusalem, slaughtering lambs, eating the Passover. We do know in Acts 21 that Paul was asked to prove some rumors wrong, that he was teaching the Jews not to circumcise their children and to forsake Moses and his customs. And the way that he was asked to prove that rumor wrong was to pay the expense for 4 men who were on the vow of the Nazir in Numbers chapter 6. And when you look at that, that wasn't just burnt offerings or peace offerings. There were sin offerings involved, or at least a sin offering involved in the vow of the Nazir. You can read about it in Numbers chapter 6, like beginning at verse 1, up probably up into the around the 20s. So, you know, people think, people have it in their mind, and I do understand that some people are at an early level of learning. I promise you, I'm not trying to be derogatory when I say that, but people are at an early level of learning, and they have it in their mind based on bad teaching in modern Christianity that, okay, I saw Matthew slaughter a lamb at Passover. He must think that he has to do that because what Yeshua did is not adequate. It has nothing to do with that. They're not butting heads. What Yeshua did, actually, there's no way that I can do that. There's no way I can add to that. There's no way I can mimic that. I'm a disciple of Yeshua, and he observed Pesach, and so I want to observe Pesach too. You know, Yeshua teaches us not just with his words, but he teaches us with his life. So if Yeshua did not specifically teach something with his speech that's recorded in, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, we could still see or read about Yeshua doing things in his actions. And when he does something in his actions, he's still teaching. So when Yeshua observed Pesach, we know for certain that he did as a young man in Luke chapter 2. I look at that and I want to mimic that in my life. See, specifically talking about the bread and the wine, do that in remembrance of him. We do that. We do the memorial supper of the Messiah, of
So why do you
Yeshua.
kill a lamb if you're commanded by your Messiah to remember him in the Passover meal? But why
Because
do you have to kill an animal?
he not only teaches us with his words, he teaches us with his life. And the entire time he was on this earth, every year, except for the one that he died, and he wanted to keep it that year, but he kept the Passover with the lamb. And so he's my rabbi, he's my teacher, so I want to imitate him in all areas that I possibly can. And so that's why I still keep the Passover in obedience to what Yahweh commanded the Israelites, and obviously the mixed multitude there that was with them that exited Egypt.
Now, the Torah explicitly forbids offering Passover outside the temple, right? Deuteronomy 16, which is why, correct me if I'm wrong, mainstream Judaism, practicing Judaism today, do not do what you're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
okay. So you're being more Jew than an ethnic Jew.
Yeah, I believe I'm correct. Yeah, I believe I'm correct.
Okay. All right. So you're correct in all of Judaism.
Can I answer Deuteronomy 16, or you want to move on?
I'll move on.
Okay. I see right here, and I think Mike's fixing to jump in. That's rude. That's rude. You don't get to bring up a point in a cross-ex period and then say, I'm not going to let you respond. That's not allowed. Cross-ex is one person asks questions, the other person gives answers. Now, it is difficult, and I have done this myself in other cross examinations. I try to get better each time, but it's difficult sometimes not to clap back, not to make a statement that's not a question. But if you're going to do that, then the other person gets to respond. That's the whole point of the cross X. And I think this is where Michael jumps in.
The law of Moses strictly
No,
prohibits.
I'm gonna have to stop that. Matthew gets the chance to respond to that. Thank you. If he wants to respond, he can do that.
Yeah. Now, this is what a moderator is supposed to be for. Why do we even have moderators if they're not going to moderate? I've seen some debates that get way out of hand. And I understand sometimes these moderators of these big channels, they know people like to see a good, spicy argument. And so they let them go back and forth for a while. I know that that's the case, right? But at some point, a moderator needs to moderate. He needs to step in and say, no, order in the court, like he did here. And so I think Michael did great. I don't think Carlos liked it, but I think Michael did great by giving me an opportunity. It's not like I want to do a 3-minute monologue, but it gives me an opportunity to answer. So Deuteronomy 16 begins in Deuteronomy 12 when you come into the land. And I believe once Israel entered into their place of rest in the land as an established theonomy or theocracy, they were not allowed any longer to do any outside sacrifices. They had to go to the temple stood, and all of that. But in Exodus 12, there was no temple. They weren't in the land, and they slaughtered the Passover, and Yahweh was okay with it. And I consider ourselves to be in that somewhat state or similar state today. So wilderness wandering. Yeah. He's squirming. He's ready to get to the next point. Hopefully you guys see my point. I get asked this every year. Deuteronomy 16. People act like, well, Brother Matthew, you must have never read Deuteronomy 16. Okay, so I read through the Torah all the time. I study the Torah. Okay, I know Deuteronomy 16, 5 and 6. Don't offer the Passover in every place that you see, but where Yahweh puts his name, which wasn't Jerusalem when they came into the land, by the way. It was Shiloh, Eli the priest. That's where Yahweh put his name. Eventually it was taken from there. Ichabod was written on the doorpost. The glory had departed, and then he eventually put his name in Jerusalem. That's where it remained up until, the time period when Yeshua lived. It was still there in Jerusalem. The temple still stood. The point I was making is if you backtrack from Deuteronomy 16 to Deuteronomy 12, it begins about when you come into the land, you're going to do things different than you're doing now here in the wilderness. As a matter of fact, it says in Deuteronomy 12, verse 8, you will not do like we do here this day, every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes. We read that in a negative way because there are some other contexts in Tanakh where whatever's right in a man's own eyes is negative, but it's not like that in Deuteronomy 12. In Deuteronomy 12:8, he's saying, we're in the wilderness right now, and you people of Israel, my servants, my follower, my son, Exodus 4, my firstborn son, you people of Israel are striving to follow me in not just your sacrifices, but also your tithes, your offerings, your contributions. And I appreciate the service that you're giving me here in the wilderness, but there's going to come a time period where we're going to be at rest in the land, the promised land that I'm going to give to you. The temple is going to be stationary. I'm going to put my name in a particular city. And when we reach that point in time, you won't just be offering sacrifices or tithing just in any location. You will have to bring everything to a central hub where my name or my authority dwells. But while they're in the wilderness, for goodness sakes, while they're in Egypt, there's no temple. There's no tabernacle. There's no even altar made. They're told to slaughter a lamb, put the blood on the doorpost, and then burn the remains of the lamb. showing us that Passover can be kept even in a foreign land and even in a wilderness wandering. And all I'm saying is right now, we are in a more of a wilderness state of living or a foreign land state of living than we are a theocracy or a theonomy state of living, like Yeshua was there in Luke chapter 2, or like they were under King Hezekiah or King Josiah in the book of First Chronicles, chapter First and Second Chronicles, I should say. So I'm of the belief that it's okay to offer some offerings, some animals, in the same way that the Israelites did it in Exodus 12, Numbers 9, and the same way that the patriarchs did it in the book of Genesis. People tell me all the time, they say, well, you can't offer a sacrifice because you're not in the land and there's no temple. And I'm thinking, the tithes had to go to the temple and in the land too, right? But people still pay tithes or give offerings. Was there a temple, or was there a central hub when Abel offered the firstling of his flock and the fat portions thereof in Genesis 4? What about in Genesis 8 when Noah got off the boat and made an altar and offered up the clean animals? Well, Brother Matthew, that was before the temple. I agree. And they were keeping Sabbath. They were eating clean. They were making altars, offering up sacrifices. Joseph knew not to commit adultery when Potiphar's wife tried to lie with him. One of Laban's daughters, was it Rachel, I think, or Leah? It was Rachel or Leah. She said, the time of woman is upon me, when she wouldn't get up because she didn't want her dad to find his idol. What do you mean the time of woman is upon me? Genesis 38, Onan was killed by Yahweh because he wouldn't raise up seed, perform the duty of his brother. All of this takes place in Genesis before the codification of the Torah. And we have no problem with these things until it comes to animal sacrifices. I don't want to make this whole thing about animal sacrifices, but I've taught several sermons, if people want to go in depth, where you can watch, listen, or read my thoughts. But anyhow, he didn't want me to answer that, but thankfully Mike stepped in and allowed me to. Let's move on.
The law of Moses strictly prohibits working on the Sabbath. It's sort of unspecified work, right? Because you have that scary story, I believe it's in the book of Numbers, the guy gathering wood for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. What matters is he's found working.
The reason does matter.
Gathering wood. I mean, it could have been a humanitarian reason. We don't know. They bring him to Moses, as you know, and the text is silent on that.
No, the text speaks. It's not silent.
Okay, what does the text say? Why is he gathering wood?
The episode there is Numbers 15, 32 through 36. Yep. And if you just read just above it, verse 30 and 31, and a little bit above that, it differentiates between unintentional sins and what the Hebrew text says, high-handed sins. So there it says,
interpreting that as
all texts have to be interpreted. This bothers me so much when somebody says you're interpreting. Every text has to be interpreted. This is why we have different denominations, different understandings. This is why we arrive at different conclusions, because we read texts and we interpret them based on their context.
He's sinning then.
I'm interpreting it in context, unintentional and high-handed. And so he must have sinned high-handedly because
he must have. That's your opinion. He must have then.
Is it just a coincidence that Yahweh differentiates between unintentional sins and high-handed sins in Numbers 15, right before the Sabbath breaking episode, when the guy's told to be cut off from his people and put to death? Yahweh says you need to stone him with stones. Do we really think that's a coincidence? The same chapter, I mean, boom, boom, 30, 31. Whoever does a high-handed sin, verses 30 and 31 of Numbers 15, cut off from the people, all of a sudden they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath. It is foolish to say that those two things are not connected in that chapter. It is complete foolishness to say they're not connected. That is definitely why the man was put to death. Definitely why he was stoned.
So let
Based on
me
the
get to
text right
my
there in Numbers 15.
right. Well, that's your interpretation. Let me get to my question. So why did Jesus on a Sabbath day stand there, openly declare that he was working on the Sabbath day?
You
John
talking about
5
John
17.
5?
John
Yeah.
5:17.
Some work was allowed to be done on the Sabbath. He took the cue from his Father in heaven. His Father in heaven makes people breathe. He lets the sun rise. Sometimes he sends rain on the Sabbath day. And so Yeshua says, I've watched my Father do this type of work. And so I'm going to heal a man that's been diseased for 38 years on the Sabbath. He wasn't doing carpentry work on the Sabbath.
So humanitarian work is an exemption under the law in the letter. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully you all caught that. John 5, Carlos makes a humongous deal in his book and in his teachings, audio teachings, video teachings, that Jesus worked on the Sabbath. He was working on the Sabbath. But yet, he kind of doesn't really delve into Yeshua's point. So Yeshua was never caught doing carpentry work on the Sabbath. He was never caught, building a home or making money on Shabbat, going out working, labor and sweating. He was never caught doing that. The work that Yeshua was doing in John chapter 5 was healing. And when he says, my Father has been working till now and I'm working, he's not talking about the Father worked in the same way that he worked on days 1 through 6 in Genesis chapter 1. And then he rested. Yahweh rested on the seventh day. Exodus 31 says he rested and was refreshed, echoing back to that Genesis creation account. Yeshua is referring to the Father continuing to sustain his initial creation in Genesis 1. So the Father sends rain. Sometimes it rains on Sabbath. The Father makes the sun to rise. We know the sun rises every Sabbath. Yeshua is saying, I've watched my Father take care of people on Sabbath. Sunshine, rain, lets them inhale, exhale. And so I'm making this man whole on the Sabbath. I'm healing this man on Shabbat. That is humanitarian. There's nothing in the Torah that forbids that.
What verse do you have for that in the law? Where did God say, oh, if you want to heal someone or rescue your animal or whatever, you can break
Jesus
the Sabbath?
explained it. He explained it right
what
there.
text in the law? Give me a text.
I'm telling you, Jesus told you already. He said, have you not read?
No, the law. I want a
have
text
you not
from the law.
I'm going to answer you like Jesus did. All right. He said, have you not read? You should know this, Pharisees. Have you not read? And he goes to David first. And he mentions David eating showbread, which was not lawful.
Yeah,
was
those
not
are
lawful.
exceptions that
No,
Jesus makes the rule. I'm asking you for where did Yahweh,
I'm
your
trying to explain
Yahweh,
it to you.
my Yahweh, say that, rest on the Sabbath except if you want to do X, Y, and Z? Please give me a text.
David was allowed to eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat.
You're not answering my question.
I'm trying to. If you want to let me, I'll answer if you let me, Carlos.
You're not answering. Matthew.
Primary example of Carlos not allowing me to answer. Each time he gave me 5 to 10 seconds and didn't even let me get my answer. Okay, I was choosing to answer Carlos in the way that Yeshua answered his objectors in Matthew chapter 12. That was the route that I took. I could have took 2 other routes. Let me go over those 2 real quick. I could have went to Deuteronomy 22, where Yahweh says, if you see your neighbor's ox or donkey in trouble, in need, or astray, you shall return it to your neighbor. And he never says, unless it's on the Sabbath, then don't do it. There's never a clause in any of the humanitarian principles or commandments that Yahweh gives in the Torah that says, do this unless it's Shabbat. And it's the same thing with circumcision. This was understood by the Jewish people, even in the first century, according to John 7, is in Leviticus chapter 12, it is said that a little Israelite baby boy that is born to parents, the flesh of his foreskin on his male member is to be circumcised on the 8th day. Now, the 8th day of a little boy's life would sometimes fall on the Sabbath, but there's no clause in Leviticus 12 that says, do this except for when the 8th day falls on the Sabbath. See, so it was therefore understood by the Jewish people that they would continue to obey the command of circumcision even if it fell on Shabbat. See, now the path I wanted to take was what I mentioned in my opening statement concerning Matthew chapter 12. Yeshua's argument there to the Pharisees that rebuke his disciples for plucking grain on Shabbat, Yeshua's argument is multi-layered, and that's why he begins with David and the showbread. But Carlos would never let me get past that. I mentioned it in detail, I think, either in my opening statement or in my personal rebuttal, 10-minute rebuttal. It's one of the two that I mentioned it. I'm still not sure to this day if Carlos understands my argument. He has never responded to my argument. He just continues to have his own talking points that he's came up with himself, and he's not responding. This is something I run into a lot in my, not just my formal debates, but my personal talks with people. They'll ask me a question or make their point, and I'll respond to their point or question. And then instead of responding to my response with additional argumentation, they just repeat their same argument over again. That's the sign of a failed argument, when you can't respond to a response. This is what Carlos is doing right here. Okay. He is not, I don't think, even listening to my argument in my opening or rebuttal. I don't think he understands it. Let me say it as fast as I know how to say it right now. Okay. The point in Matthew chapter 12, and you can turn over there. I'm not going to pull it up right there. You can have your Bible or pull your phone out. You can go to Matthew chapter 12. Yeshua's point is this. He starts off with David and the showbread. He says that David and his men ate bread which was not lawful for them to eat. You can go back to 1 Samuel chapter 21. I think it's verses 1 through 6, and you see the account. Normally, the showbread was only to be eaten by the priest based on Leviticus 24. But because of David's circumstance, he was on a run for his life from King Saul trying to murder him. He was allowed humanitarianly to eat bread. So human need trumped temple service. Temple service was important, but it was not as important as human need. All right. Next layer of the argument. Have you not read? Yeshua says how that the priests in the temple break or profane Shabbat, but yet they're blameless. What does he mean they profane Shabbat? Well, technically, the priests work on the Sabbath, but it is work that Yahweh has given them to do. They're still slaughtering animals on the Sabbath, even more so than the work days. They're still tending to all their ministerial duties in the tabernacle/temple. So technically, they are breaking Shabbat, but they're not held culpable because Yahweh has commanded them to do this temple service, and he's not said stop when it gets to Shabbat. So therefore, temple service is greater than Shabbat. All right? Now, catch the argument, multi-layered. If human need is greater than temple service, proven by David and his men, the showbread, all right, and temple service is greater than Shabbat, proven by the priest in the temple, the conclusion is equals human need must be greater than Shabbat. Do you see? It's multi-layered. I hope that you understood that. You can find my notes on the homepage of my website, ministersnewcovenant.org, and I go over it in written form. But I hope you understood that. I hope Carlos, maybe he'll listen to this one day. I hope that he slows down and understands that point, even though he wouldn't let me answer in the debate.
17, if I may move on.
Okay.
The temple tax, you know the story well. The temple tax people, I guess the temple taxman comes along. Mm-hmm. Why are they exempt from the temple tax mandated in the letter of the law as far as I can see? Why does Jesus say you're exempt from the law?
There is no commandment in the Torah about an annual half shekel tax. The commandment in Exodus 30 surrounds taking a census. It is not an annual tax. Jesus was not the only Jew that believed that he was exempt. The Qumran community believed they were exempt. The Levite priests argued that they were exempt. Josephus differentiates between the command in Exodus 30 and the custom that's mentioned in Matthew chapter 17. And so there was no law for an annual tax on Jewish people.
That's not what Matthew 17 even hints at. What everything you just said is not in the passage about collecting the half shekel temple tax. Matthew 17:24. People can go and check it out. You just made that whole thing up. Let me move on. Jesus.
Not a response. That was not a response. He's just basically saying, no, it's not like that. I gave him all that information. Let me pull up something right here. Let me see. I'm going to remove this. Here's my notes on the temple tax in Matthew 17. So he asked me about this. His point is he thinks that Jesus is violating the Torah by saying they're not obligated to pay the temple tax. All right. My point here, we'll just go down the list here. Hopefully you can see what we got. The first one, there is no command in Exodus 30 about an annual half shekel tax. The command surrounds taking a census. Just go read it. Exodus 30, 11 through 16. It doesn't say anything in that text about annually taxing the people of Israel. It is when you take a census. That is the command that's given. Now, my next point, and I mentioned it, I was talking real fast because, we don't have unlimited time, but in the writings of Josephus differentiates in his writings between the commandment back in Exodus and the annual custom. Now, I have here Antiquities 3, Antiquities 7, and Antiquities 18. You can look these up and compare, and you'll see in certain cases, Josephus is talking about what the commandment was versus what was customary during the first century in his time. My next point, the Qumran community interpreted, now remember, these are Torah observant Jewish people, all right? Not all Torah observant Jews agreed on every point of the Torah. They all agreed the Torah needed to be observed, but not on every minutia of the Torah. Qumran interpreted the Exodus 30 command as they had to pay at one time in their life. You can find this in 4Q 159. Also, the entire priesthood said that they were exempt from the command in Exodus 30, 11 through 16, based on Leviticus 6, verse 23. This is in Tractate Shekalim 1:4. They argued that this text forbade them, Leviticus 6, forbade them from eating a grain offering in which they owned a share. Since they were supposed to eat the public grain offerings, payment of the half shekel would disqualify them from the Omer offering, the bread of the presence, the barley Omer offering, and the 2 loaves of Shavuot. So they were not allowed, they were forbidden to eat an offering from which they owned a share. To pay the Exodus 30, 11 through 16 payment would mean they owned a share in these offerings, and therefore they wouldn't be allowed to eat them. Do you see the argument there? All right. So also here at the end, the question, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? This question is likely a question of wondering where Yeshua stood on the interpretation of the Torah portion in Exodus 30. So the Pharisees were asking him legitimately, does your teacher, or the disciples, does your teacher, not him, but the disciples, does he pay the temple tax? Not trying to, say, well, he doesn't pay because, he's breaking the Torah, but where does he stand on this? There's debate in our, wide range Jewish community on this Torah portion. Where does your teacher stand? And then he speaks of the sons versus the foreigners. And I don't take the sons, Yeshua speaks of the sons. I don't take the sons here as meaning his disciples and him. I take Yeshua speaking of sons, speaking of Israelites. And Yahweh never commanded an annual tax on his sons. He said the children are free, the sons are free. He still pays it not to offend their custom, but he doesn't pay it because it was obligatory. No, he pays it not to offend their custom. So Carlos goes on to say, well, none of that's in the text. Listen, it's all based on Matthew 17 and Exodus 30, other texts in the Torah, and then historical writings that are connected to the subject. So I don't think he was listening to my answer. I don't think he wanted to respond to my answer. I don't think he was interested in my answer. I think he's just, trying to have a gotcha moment there. I don't think he's listening, that's not appropriate. That's not the way to do things.
Jesus
that,
says,
that wasn't a question there. That was a statement. You have a question to ask me?
yeah, I got a next question. Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
All right,
But
listen, I gotta step in here. Okay, so here's the thing. So Carlos, if you don't think he answered the question, make it clear if you want him to answer it, because Matthew, I'll have to, obviously make sure that you answer that question. So Carlos, do you want him to answer that, or do you want to just move on from that?
Yeah, I said I'm moving on. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth in Matthew 5. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. How is this not a direct change of, let's call it change of the eye for an eye? Show no pity of Deuteronomy 19, verse 21.
Deuteronomy 19 is specifically written to the judges of Israel, not the personal Israelites. It was when they were going over court cases and pronouncing verdicts on criminals.
Yes, I heard that I think in your opening or rebuttal. So
Okay, but you asked me, and so I gave you an answer. He's very condescending. He needs to work on it. He's very condescending in his responses to me.
I'm trying to understand that position. So how does that work in the church, in our congregations? So are we supposed to set up some kind of a la Sanhedrin system? Is that what how do we obey Jesus here? I don't understand you.
We obey Jesus by not taking personal vengeance out on people. We are peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. We don't try to put ourselves in the position of the Sanhedrin or the judges of Israel. So the judges of Israel, if somebody steals, my whole flock of sheep and they're caught, they have to repay back 4 sheep for a sheep and 5 cattle for an ox, right? Exodus 22. So that's righteous, but I'm not to take personal vengeance out on my neighbor.
Okay, so if a congregant, someone in your church community, religious community, it kills someone, what
I was shocked that he even went here on this. I mean, obviously, if somebody commits murder, all right, this is something that's still looked upon as a capital crime in our society, even though our society in many ways is heathenistic and pluralistic. Thank the Almighty that they still see murder as a capital crime or rape as a capital crime. Now, something like adultery, slap on the wrist, or not even a slap on the wrist, just get a divorce. That's wild and it's wrong. Adultery is a capital crime under Yahweh's law, punishable by death, right? For a man to take another man's wife. Be that as it may, we do still see our society punish murderers. They do not often punish them the way that Yahweh requires, but they still receive a type of punishment. So if somebody committed murder in a Christian community, whether it was our Torah observant congregation or the local Baptist church, hopefully they would be caught, handed over to the authorities, and punished. Are we really going to say that that's not proper? If we're not going to do that, what are we going to do with somebody that commits murder or rape? What are we going to do? See, at that point, if we dismiss the punishment that Yahweh has given in his Torah, we then have to substitute it with something that we come up with in our own idea, in our own thought-making process.
What Jesus says here, how do you practically then deal with that?
Well,
according
I
to
would,
Jesus?
if somebody in the congregation murders somebody, I would hope that they would get the death penalty.
Right, but I'm saying when you interpret that the law in the letter, eye for an eye, tooth for, was in regards to judicial
punishment, right?
System, not an individual thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but when Jesus says in my ears.
Notice too here, Jesus in Matthew 5, murder is not the subject when he's talking about this eye for eye stuff. He mentions slap on the cheek, asking somebody to go a second mile, or somebody taking away your garment. It should not be overlooked that these are light matters, not heavy matters. He does not say in this section if somebody rapes your wife, if somebody murders your child, if somebody sets your house on fire and you watch it burn. He doesn't say heavy matters here. He's talking about light matters.
But I'm telling you, do not resist an evil person.
And then he explains it. He goes on to give you the explanation there. Minor infractions, right? Slap on the cheek, taking away the tunic, telling you to go a mile. He didn't say if somebody rapes your wife or murders your kid.
I forgot that I said that.
So when he goes on to say, love your enemies.
Notice there's no response. I think he has his personal thoughts already in his mind, and he's not trying to interact. If you'll notice, and I guess there's no way for you to know for sure, but you watch my facial expressions, I am genuinely trying to follow and track with him on what he is saying. I'm not just thinking about what I'm going to say next. I'm trying to listen to his statement and respond to that statement. That is respectful dialogue.
Pray for those who persecute you and so on.
Right.
So again, are you under the eye for an eye law? Sorry, I'm trying to understand.
Of course, yes, of course, yeah. We still believe in all of Yahweh's law through Moses.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, so God forbid, again, I don't mean to be morbid here, but if there is a crime,
yeah,
in your congregation, then you're interpreting Jesus as saying you have a right, Matthew, to take that life, eye for an eye.
Well, I'd go through the judicial system. I would go through the judicial system because the Sanhedrin is non-existent right now. Yeah.
I see.
Okay. And I think he caught that. And if I remember right, he's going to ask about self-defense here in a second. But I would go through the judicial system in our local and state government now, living in the state of Georgia where I'm at. But if I was in the land of Israel, I would fall up under the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the ruling court of 70 or 71 elders, patterned after Moshe and the 70 elders in the wilderness. And they would hear court cases, and they would pronounce verdicts. And that's what all of the eye for eye, tooth for tooth texts in the Torah, I think there's 3, maybe 4 of them, I'm going by memory. But every one of them, if you look at it, is in reference to the judges of Israel, not to individual Israelites. So there was a proper procedure in carrying out the judgments, just like there's a proper procedure in carrying out judgments now. Even though we don't live in a theocracy, we still have to have a rule of law in the land, and certain actions are crimes, not just sins.
But at that point, in the moment, do you implement eye for an eye?
Oh, self-defense. You mean self-defense?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would stop the intruder with whatever force necessary. Just like Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, if the intruder comes in, he has to first bind the strong man, else he can't take the goods of the house. I would be the strong man, so he'd have to bind me first in order to.
Do you catch that? See, Yeshua's point is meaningless there in that parable, and you can look it up in the Gospel of Matthew. That if there is someone that breaks into your house, and he's telling a parable, but it's a true and real point, that the intruder must first bind the strong man. That would be the patriarch, the head of the home. In my case, it would be me. He would have to first bind me in order to carry out thievery or any type of unholy activity upon my family. Why would he have to first bind me, or you, if you're the man of your house? Well, it was because you would be protecting your home and your family. This harkens back to Exodus 22, maybe beginning at verse 2. If a thief is caught in the act of breaking in and he is beaten to death, no one is guilty of bloodshed. But if this happens after sunrise, there is guilt of bloodshed. A thief must make full restitution. If he is unable, he is to be sold because of his theft. If what was stolen, whether ox, donkey, or sheep, is actually found alive in his possession, he must repay double. The point in Exodus 22, though, is that the homeowner is given the benefit of the doubt if just a thief, a burglar, breaks in at nighttime, because you cannot see what his intentions are like you can during the day. So you don't know if he's got a weapon. You don't know if he's came there to kill or to rape. You don't know that he's just coming to steal something. Now, if it's during the daytime, you need to be cautious. All right. So just that's the point of Exodus 22, verses, I think 2 and maybe verse 3 right there. So self-defense is a biblical practice.
Got it. So
Yeah.
when you take that life that is trying to harm yourself, your family, your neighbor, when you kill the enemy,
Right.
you have fulfilled the law to love your enemy.
Love your enemy in Matthew 5:43 through 48 isn't saying that you cannot practice self-defense if somebody's trying to murder your family.
Well, killing someone is not very loving, is it?
Okay. I couldn't believe he said this. So what I should have said here, which what I said was accurate, but I wish that I would have said this. In that scenario, you have the option of protecting your wife, which equals loving your wife, or protecting the one who is going to kill or rape your wife. And you're telling me that I should let something like that happen to my wife so that I can love that enemy right there? What about loving your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it? So here, what we have, if we want to speak of both commands like that, we have loving your wife and loving your enemy butting heads. Which one is greater? Obviously, it should be obvious. Love your wife is greater than love for your enemy. So in that case, you love your wife and you take your enemy out. I hope Carlos would do that in spite of what he says. I hope that his patriarchy would kick in and he would protect his wife instead of let something bad happen to her.
Well, I'm doing it out of self-defense. It's either my wife die or the intruder die.
Why didn't Jesus say that, by the way?
The love that Jesus, the way he illustrates it is the sunshine and the rain. He says, your father makes the sun shine on the righteous and the unrighteous and sends rain on the just and the unjust. Those are common graces that Yahweh gives to humanity.
Right.
Doesn't mean Yahweh loves all of humanity in the exact same way.
Do you catch that point? The point is extremely important that you get it. But the love that Yahweh has for his enemies is not salvific love. It's not the same love that he has for people who are devoted to him. He illustrates it with sunshine and rain. The same sun that shines on my house as a man in covenant with Yahweh shines on my atheist neighbor's house down the street. Not that I have an atheist neighbor, but for illustration. That's the way Yahweh loves the atheist. He doesn't love the atheist in the exact same way that he loves me. That's not to say that the atheist can't repent and get into this covenantal love. But Yahweh is not omnibenevolent in that he loves everybody exactly the same way. I don't think Carlos caught that point. I think he just moves on. Let me see.
You claimed in Matthew 5, still Matthew 5:17.
Yeah.
You claimed that the word fulfill means to properly interpret. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think fulfill in verse 17 is do and teach in verse 19. I think those are equated.
Y'all remember that point? We covered this point in the first review with the several brothers. If you look at verse 17, do not think I came to abolish, but to fulfill. And then 2 verses later, Yeshua is still talking. Whoever then, or therefore, whoever annuls, right? One of the least of these commandments, but whoever does and teaches them. So annuls and abolish are equivalents, and fulfill is equivalent with, drum roll, do and teach. So the whole context of Matthew 5 is not about something Yeshua is doing like in his own lifestyle. The whole context of Matthew 5 is about Yeshua's teachings. Now, he's going to go into the lexical definition of fulfill, plerosai, here. I don't know if he mentions it by exactness. And I have no problem with the translation fulfill or establish or confirm. I have no problem with translating it like that. But the understanding is do and teach, verse 19. That's the understanding. Words are defined by the context in which they are used.
Right. I think in your opening, I'm trying to quote you, to properly interpret.
Right.
You said in your
Yeah.
opening. All right.
Exactly.
What is your evidence for that definition of the Greek there, translated fulfill?
The entire 5th chapter of Matthew. Words are determined by the context in which they're used. So the entire 5th chapter of Matthew is about Yeshua's teaching, juxtaposed to the scribes and Pharisees, verse 20. It's not about Yeshua's life. It's not about what necessarily he's going to do, but it's about what he teaches others to do, how he teaches others. That's why he said, you've heard it has been said this, scribes and Pharisees have said this, but I'm going to tell you this. My
kudos to Carlos for actually letting me answer right here. I think this is the best that he's done.
halakha is better. It is different than theirs in these cases.
I'm trying to understand, Matthew, why you're changing the meaning of a word.
See, I'm not changing the meaning of a word. I think people listening to this review can see that. I have no problem with the word being fulfilled. Leave it the same. I explained in the previous cross-ex, me to Carlos, that it is synonymous with verse 19. Verse 19 is Yeshua stating abolish and fulfill by just using other words. Annul versus do and teach. Abolish versus fulfill. Annul versus do and teach. That's not hard to see. That is not difficult to see. You don't even have to go to the Greek. Just stick with the English. It's not difficult to see that. This is what I didn't come to do, Yeshua said, but I came to do this. Therefore, my disciples, those who follow me, you shouldn't break, but you should do and teach. It's so simple, man.
And it sounds like you're saying because of the context, because no translation, as you know, no lexicon that I know interprets the word translated fulfill as to properly interpret.
Yeah, I'm fine with the word fulfill. I'm fine with the translation, Carlos. I don't have a problem with that. But words are defined. Words have no definition apart from their context. You know that.
Yeah, but you're changing the meaning of a word that is not one of the meanings for the word. That's my point. Do you see? Okay.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Thayer's Greek lexicon actually defines it the way that I do on Matthew 5:17. So
English language, just any dictionary. Anyway.
It's like he's not listening there. I forgot about this during this review, but I'm correct. You can look up the word fulfill in Greek. Plerao, pleru. Technically, it's plerosai in Matthew 5:17. Used only twice in that particular verbiage. Also in Matthew 3:15, to fulfill all righteousness, Yeshua tells Yochanan the Baptist. But I mentioned that Henry Joseph Thayer, in Thayer's Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament, defines the use of fulfill in Matthew 5:17. Where is my Thayer's? It's right here. I've got it on the computer. Do we want to pull it up? Let's take the time to pull it up. All right. So we have Matthew 5:17 here at BibleHub.com interlinear. Not menomi sete, not think. Really don't even begin to think, technically. That I have come to abolish katalise, ta noman, the law, or the prophets. I'm not come to abolish, but fulfill. There it says plerosai right there. Okay. So look, like if we click on plerosai, I want you to notice right here, 2 occurrences here in the Gospel of Matthew, only for this particular use. 3:15, fitting for us to fulfill 5:17. All right. It's used right here in Romans 15:13 and Colossians 1:25 from the pen of the Apostle Paul, but only twice in the Gospel of Matthew, let's see. Hopefully I can go back. Oh, man. No, okay. All right. Hold up here. All right. Scrolling up. So, all right. But let's look at 4137. All right. So this is going to be Playrao or Playru. And if we scroll down here, see if I think there's Thayer's. Thayer's right here. All right. Let's scroll down. He gives a bunch of different definitions. But the definition that he gives at the end, Matthew 5:17. All right, this is Matthew 5:17 right here. Okay. To cause God's will as made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be, and God's promises given through the prophets to receive fulfillment. But the first part about the law, let's just focus on that. He's saying Matthew 5:17's use of pleiru or plerosai means not that fulfill is wrong as a definition, but to cause God's will as made known in the law to be obeyed as it should be. Henry Joseph Thayer. That's what I just said, and I got rebuked for it by Carlos. All right, let's pull him back up here.
If Jesus, let's go to Matthew 19, the marriage and divorce issue, as you know.
Sure.
If Jesus' teaching there is merely him, I don't know, interpreting or clarifying Moses rather than changing Moses.
Yeah.
So why did Jesus say, so I'm going to read here, Moses permitted you to divorce, and then he gives the reason because their heart were hardness or hardness of heart.
Right.
But he says, from the beginning, it was not so. But I say to you, and then I say to you.
Yeah.
Now, well, let me put it this way. Is Jesus doing away with the certificate of divorce under Moses?
No.
That's it?
I mean, I can go into it more.
Now he wants me to talk. Brothers and sisters, you know what I was doing right here? I was trying to take it easy on him because I knew that if I went into the Torah portion on divorce, that he wasn't going to be able to comprehend it because it's not something he studied. He doesn't know the depth of Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. He doesn't know that there's a difference between kirituth and shalak in the Torah, and carrying that over into the Greek text in the Gospel of Matthew, there's a difference between apoluo and apostation. Apostation is technical for bill of divorcement. Apoluo just means to send away or to put away. It's the same with kirituth and shalak in the Tanakh. He doesn't realize that Yeshua is condemning a man who merely puts away his wife without a bill of divorcement, which is possible to do. There's some people even in the Torah community that make fun of me for saying this. And it's like they don't think it can be a reality that a man can skip to the third part in the divorce law and just send his wife away without giving her a bill of divorce. And then obviously if she doesn't have that bill of divorce and she marries another man, she's in adultery. And Yeshua is saying that when a man does that, in Matthew 5, Matthew 19, when a man is that hard-hearted to do that, he is holding the man culpable for any adultery that the wife may be involved in. The reason he's holding the man culpable is because he has not carried out the Torah portion of Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. Now, some of you may not have ever heard that or understood that. You can study that. I advise you to. I've taught a whole series on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. But I guarantee you, if I would have said that to Carlos, just like I did right there, it would have went in one ear and out the other. I was honestly trying to be merciful on him by just stating what I stated succinctly. But he said, not anymore. You ain't got nothing else.
I don't know how much time you want to take.
Well, Moses permitted you to divorce.
Yeah.
5 more
But
minutes,
it
Carlos.
But it wasn't so from the beginning. So Jesus goes all the way back to Genesis to overturn, it sounds like, the certificate of divorce. And then he explicitly contrasts and overrides the permission there.
Yeah, a lot of things weren't so from the beginning. It wasn't so to wear clothes from the beginning either. But after the fall of mankind, Yahweh gives laws to regulate how we live.
Right.
In Deuteronomy 24, Yahweh gave a law that protected women. It was for the protection of women. Men were allowed to have multiple wives. It wasn't for the
Right.
protection of the men, but it's for the protection of the woman so she could be loved by a proper man. So if she found no favor in his eyes because he found some unclean or indecent thing in her, he could write out a certificate, put it in her hand, and send her out of his house. She could go be another man's wife. Jesus is not overturning that in Matthew chapter 19.
Mike, did you say 2 minutes or so?
See, are you listening? I don't know if he's listening. See what I'm saying? And he asked me to go deeper and I went a little bit deeper, and I think he's zoning out, worried about the time. Let's see if he just moves on.
No, you have about 4 more minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's see. Galatians 5.
Okay, see, so he just moves on here. Unbelievable. Do you have anything more you want to say? Are you sure you want me to say it? How much time, Carlos, do you want me to take up? And so I go into it a little bit and he zones out. Young men, if you ever get involved in a debate, resist the fleshly temptation to not listen, to be crude, to be disrespectful, no matter what the other person does. There are going to be other people watching, and they will see Christian character, messianic character, flow from you and the way you speak. If you are respectful to the other person, when they are talking, if you are listening, if you are directly responding or trying your best to respond to what they're saying, don't just let somebody be talking and you're worried about time, or you're worried about something else, or you're reading your notes, you're not listening. I see it happen more than just in this debate. I see it happen. I listen to debates a lot. I don't watch many, but I download them and I listen to them. And I see it happen a whole lot. So Carlos doesn't understand the law of Deuteronomy 24. I don't think he cares to, because I think he believes it's just irrelevant. It doesn't matter anymore. The reality is his position, and a lot of Christians' position. You could peel off Malachi back to Genesis from your Bible and just carry around the New Testament and you'd be fine. You don't really need it. Now, they don't want to do that because they want to keep it without keeping it, right? But you could do that because they don't really believe anything before that has major relevancy. Now, Carlos tries to straddle the fence because he teaches the Jewishness of Jesus and that Jesus was a strict monotheist, and he believed in the Shema, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh, our mighty one. Yahweh is one, Echad, which means one, by the way. A lot of my brothers need to hear that. It does mean one, even though they try to make it mean something else. But he's straddling the fence, taking that, and then not believing verse 5 of Deuteronomy 6, to love Yahweh with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength, keeping the Torah. I could go more into Deuteronomy 24, but, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to continue on here.
5, verse 11. Now, you've said that obviously we had a debate about Paul, and
yeah, that's not about Jesus, is it? Galatians 5.
Right, but you're consistent in and I appreciate that in saying that Paul says, I imitate Messiah.
But see, Carlos and I debated, did Paul remain a Torah observant Jew? If I had that debate to do over again, I would do some things differently. But we debated that already. So for him to bring up something in Galatians, it's fine. I don't mind talking about Galatians. It's not that I can't talk about Galatians. I preached 57 sermons through the book of Galatians. All right. So I know a little bit about Galatians, but that's not the subject matter of this debate. It should not. It's like the Passover lamb question at the beginning. It should not have even been on his list of questions to ask me in that regard.
Jesus and Paul was under the law. So it's by extension, right? He's under the law because Jesus was under the law.
He was
And
a
in
good
5,
disciple.
right, in your interpretation, in 5:11, he says, as for me, brothers and sisters, if I were still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted?
Right.
So I think twice there he says,
Let's
if
see
I
what I
were
say.
still preaching circumcision, meaning he was not. So why are you?
I invite everybody to go watch that debate Carlos and I had a few years back, and we go over this text extensively. But Paul did not teach circumcision as a prerequisite for the forgiveness of sins. It was particular doctrine of circumcision that Paul did not teach.
Right.
But he did take Timothy, had the boy circumcised before they started the ministry there in Acts 16. So he must not be against all circumcision of grown adult men.
This is a point I hammered. If you go back and watch that debate, that there's no way that when Paul said, do not become circumcised, that it could be a, full stop statement, because he circumcised Timothy in Acts 16, right after the Jerusalem Council. Now, Acts 16, he takes Timothy and he circumcises him. Doesn't really matter for what reason. It could be a reason other, obviously, than, was not forced in Acts 15. But he still had him circumcised. So either he's damning Timothy, because elsewhere Paul writes, do not become circumcised. So Paul must mean for a particular reason right there. I don't want to get too much into that, but you can go watch that debate. We go over it a lot in the cross-ex and also in the Q&A at the end.
Why didn't he circumcise, was it Titus?
There was pressure from false brethren that had came
Is that
in.
what the text says?
Yeah, he says, and that because of false brethren.
Because of the false brethren.
Yeah,
I'm not
Galatians chapter 2. Yeah, they were pressuring Titus, and Paul didn't want Titus to think that the act of circumcision forgave his sin, and so he didn't.
It's so simple. If you just read it, it's like it surprised Carlos. He thought he was going to catch me. Is that what the text says? I wouldn't have said it if that's not what the text said. All right. Now, again, every text has to be interpreted, but I would not have said it if that's not what the text said. So Paul did not want Titus caving into the pressure from the false brethren. The false brethren believed Titus was not forgiven. He wasn't in right standing. He wasn't in full standing with the Jewish believers in the Messiah prior to him formally converting to Judaism through physical circumcision. Paul said, we're not going to circumcise Titus and make him think that they're right. And then Titus gets in his mind, oh, now I'm forgiven now that I went through this act, this ritual act. No, Paul wasn't going to cave into the false brothers right there.
He didn't require Titus. He didn't pressure Titus to be circumcised right there.
For the record, I know, but are you under the Sinai covenant in Moses or new covenant in Messiah?
See, what does this have to do with, did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? I guess this one's closer than some of the others, but
anybody can go listen to our debate. And you asked me that question and I answered it about Paul. So this debate's about if Jesus practiced or preached the law of Moses.
If Jesus expects his church to remain under Torah, why was this not the conclusion reached by the Jerusalem Council?
It was. They actually did reach that conclusion. They just didn't plop the entire Torah down on the Gentiles all at one time. That'd be way too big of a yoke for anybody to bear. They started them off with 4 laws, and then they could go to synagogue on Shabbat, Acts 15:21, and they'd hear Moses be preached. And over time, they would grow in grace and knowledge. Yeah.
You wrote that.
Catch that. Acts 15, people think the council of elders, messianic elders, they think they made the decision. It is very famously said. They made the decision the Gentiles don't have to keep the law. No, wrong. That is wrong. The decision was made for them to start off with 4 things, and then they would learn the rest in the synagogue as Moses was read on Shabbat, verse 21. And so any Gentile that turned to Elohim from that point on, the same thing would be followed. That is completely different from saying the Gentiles don't have to keep the law. The laws that were given to the Gentiles in Acts 15 are all in Leviticus 17, 16, 17, and 18. No, 17 and 18 after Day of Atonement chapter, the forgiveness chapter in chapter 16 of Leviticus.
Jesus was not prohibiting all oaths in Matthew 5, and you know that Deuteronomy 6:13 permits swearing in God's name. And instead, you said he was rejecting the Pharisees' practice of making non-binding oaths by swearing on things, other than the divine name to evade responsibility. And Jesus lists heaven, earth, and so on. But then you quoted Jesus, and this is in an article, by the way, I read from you. And you quoted Jesus as saying, "Don't take this kind of oath at all." Now,
that's the point there in Matthew 5. That's the point. Swear not at all. I have no problem quoting Yeshua exactly how the English Bible says it. Swear not at all. Then he explains it, neither by heaven, nor by earth, nor by Jerusalem, nor by the hair of your head. See, he explains what he means by swear not at all. Now, if we remove that explanation and we just take swear not at all by itself, do you know the Torah itself says that if you do not take an oath, you have not sinned? It says this in Deuteronomy. If you take an oath, if you make a swear to Yahweh to do something, then you have to follow through and obey what you have promised. But if you do not swear, you have not transgressed. Even if we take Yeshua to say, don't swear at all, let's say he's just taking a strict stance that just to be on the safe side, don't take an oath at all, he's still in line with the Torah.
that's not what the Greek says, right?
He's explaining what he just said. When he says take no oath at all, that's what you want me to say. Take no oath at all. He's explaining the oaths that he just mentioned against taking. Don't swear by the hair of your head, your beard, a stack of Bibles, your mother's grave, so forth and so on.
Thank you.
You're welcome, buddy.
I appreciate everybody for watching. We're going to wrap it up right there. Hopefully I was able to clarify some things that I felt like I was not able to during the debate. I wasn't given the opportunity to. Thanks for watching so much. I love and appreciate all you subscribers. I'm not near as good on YouTube as some of my younger brothers are. And I'm not that old of a man, but I guess, I'm just not as good. I'm not as tech savvy as some of these brothers. So hopefully you can bear with me. And until next time, shalom, shalom.